Have you ever stopped for even 1 second in your life to ask yourself, what are emotions? We spend so much time talking about them, they dominate so much of our lives, and yet when do we ever think about them? I go back to my school life, no one ever talked about them. Growing up, no one ever talked about them other than to tell me which ones not to feel. But when do we ever stop and think about what they actually are? And as part of my adventure doing this, getting to this phase of the book, this chapter of the book, all about accepting, allowing, and processing our emotions, I was like, isn't it really important that we understand what they are before we do anything else? So ask yourself that question. Do you know what they are? What are they at their very base level? And the answer to that question is, they're just chemical reactions. That's all they are. Every emotion you ever experience, I ever experience, is a chemical reaction inside your body. That's it. And there's a famous scientist who says that the actual chemical reaction that for any emotion lasts for 90 seconds. So from start to finish, no matter what emotion you're feeling, whether that be joy or depression or anger or sadness or happiness or love, the emotion, the chemical reaction itself lasts 90 seconds. Now think of that. How amazing is that? So some of us spend years, some people decades being depressed when the initial emotion was a 90-second chemical reaction. That's some going when you think about it, isn't it? To take that 90-second chemical reaction and turn it into decades of a feeling. So this is really important. What we want to do is get into and get stuck into and figure out what are our emotions then. This goes back to the heal section when we talked about emotional repression. This part of the book in the transformation is to fully understand all of our emotions, and as the title of the chapter says, to accept, allow, and process them. Let's start at the very beginning. This is one of my favorite bits, to use my catchphrase. The problem, this is something my coach in New York taught me. The problem is never our thoughts and emotions. The problem is what we've been taught to think and feel about our thoughts and emotions. So I always say it's in layers. Think about it at the top layer. You've got your first feeling, your first emotion. So let's say you feel depressed. It's just a chemical reaction inside your body. If we don't do anything with that emotion, nothing happens. It's neutral. If we don't label it as anything good or bad, nothing happens. It's neutral. Whether that's happiness or sadness or depression or anxiety, it doesn't matter. The problem is what we've been taught to think or feel about it, which is the next layer down. So we feel depression. And then the story in our mind is, oh, I'm not meant to feel depression. That's bad. So then the problem isn't the first emotion. The problem is what we're thinking or feeling about that first emotion. And this can go on and on in spirals, going back Karate Kid training into the take responsibility. Once we start noticing this, we can start actually getting into a downward spiral of beating ourselves up, because we can say, oh, hang on, I've just noticed I'm not liking myself for being depressed. And now I don't like myself for not liking myself for being depressed. And this can go on and on. And this is where the being kind to yourself program comes in. Because what we want to do is wherever we catch this, we want to be kind. So wherever we say, oh, I'm depressed, they go, that's okay. And if we notice that we're being mean to ourselves for feeling depressed, we can go, oh, that's okay as well. It's just a feeling. That's not a problem. It's just neutral. This is huge because it ties into something I talk about all the time, which is against most of the personal development and self-help worlds. It even goes against some of my favorite mentors and authors. The book Letting Go that I referred to in the previous episode, which I love, talks about positive and negative emotions. And I've reached a point with all of the work I do where I just think it's bullshit. There are no such thing as positive and negative emotions. They are all neutral. The only problem is what we are taught to think and feel about them. So I may have told you this story before. I think I did in the emotional repression episode. But if you don't believe me, if you don't think that there's no such thing as positive and negative emotions, you might be sitting there thinking, but Paul, fear and anger and anxiety, they're all negative emotions, aren't they? And I always say, let me tell you a story. And if you've heard this story before, it's very important. Jacob, my cameraman, has just reminded me that it's important to repeat things to infinity. One of the other catchphrases in the book. So we're going to repeat the story again. Picture yourself walking through a jungle. Picture yourself It's a lovely sunny day. You're all alone. Your mate Ethel's just gone for a wee. You think she might be catching you up in a minute. You're surrounded by trees and greenery. It's lovely. And then you hear these footsteps and you think, is that Ethel? They sound like heavier footsteps than Ethel's. And then they get quicker and they start moving. You think, hang on, there's 4 footsteps. That's definitely not Ethel. She's not running on all 4s. She's not that mobile. And then you turn around and this huge lion jumps out of the bushes at you and it's showing its teeth and it's ready to just bite your head off. In that moment, if the emotions you experience are joy, love, and happiness, you are dead. That is the end of your life. The most positive emotions you can feel in that specific scenario are fear and a bit of anger, because they're the things that are going to keep you alive. And this is the beautiful thing about our species. The emotions that have kept us alive for thousands of years are fear, anger, anxiety. These are things that are survival emotions. Without them, we wouldn't be here to experience joy and love and peacefulness. And yet we've got the cheek to label them as negative. So as I was going through this, I would be looking at it and I'd think, I don't want to call them positive and negative anymore. So what are they? Let's use new language, something I like to do a lot. You'll see in the book. I like to go, well, hang on, let's make new language. Let's refer them to different things. And what I started calling them was understood and misunderstood emotions, because we all seem to understand what love and joy and happiness are. We're happy with those. We're good with them. But when it comes to fear and anxiety and depression, we're not good. But it's because we misunderstand them. They are misunderstood emotions. So the idea of all of this is to understand the misunderstood emotions before we go any further. But there's something that's important to know before we go into that. And that is something that, again, comes as a shock to many, many people, which is when it comes to the way we feel about anything, a new piece of programming to install as part of this whole process is that nobody makes us feel anything. If you're anything like me, you will have heard people over the years say time and time again, oh, you made me feel this. She makes me feel this way. He makes me feel that way. It's nonsense. And here's an example an old personal trainer of mine gave me many, many years ago, which I loved, which was, if I hold a spider in the palm of my hand and put it in front of a group of 10 people, if 5 of those people are afraid of the spider and 5 of the people aren't, it can't be the spider making people afraid. Because if the spider was making people afraid, everybody would be afraid. Does that make sense? The fear is within us. It doesn't come from the thing. So no matter what anybody teaches you, no matter what anybody says, it's important to start recognizing that other people do not make us feel anything. The emotion is ours. Ties back into the take responsibility. Take responsibility of our own emotions. My emotions are mine. Your emotions are yours. I give the same example as well. If I say to my mum and dad, they've invited me for Sunday dinner, and I say to them, I can't make Sunday dinner this week, I'm doing something else. If my mum is accepting and she's fine with it and she says, don't worry about it, and my dad's really upset, how can I possibly be responsible for both persons' emotions? They're reacting completely differently to the same event, which shows it's not the event that's causing the emotion. The emotion is inside us. Really, really important before we go on. So this section of this chapter is all about understanding the misunderstood emotions. It's one of my very favorite parts of all of this stuff, because it's learning things no one ever taught us. We should teach this stuff in school. If we all learned this stuff in school, our lives would be so much easier. I even went as far as, when I was doing this, to create charts that I've put in the book. And you can actually download from my website, even if you don't buy the book. If you go to paul7cope.com/images, you can see these charts of misunderstood and understood emotions. Because what I found was, when I first started doing this work, my therapist would ask me how I felt about something, and I wouldn't be able to give him an answer. You may have heard me say before, I'd give him an answer and he'd say to me, that's not how you feel, Paul, that's how you think. And then he asked me again, and I'd give him another answer. He'd be like, no, they're still thoughts, not feelings. How do you feel? And I remember saying to him once, that's all I've got. I don't know what else to get you. I'd been repressing my emotions for so long, which most of us have, or many of us have. I'd been repressing them for so long, I didn't know what they were anymore. So whilst this sounds really juvenile in some ways, and some people might be upset about this, I went right back to basics, and I went on the internet and I downloaded a list of emotions, and I started looking at these lists of emotions and thinking, well, when do I feel that? let's start connecting things I feel with the words. Let's start defining them more. Let's start connecting with them more. So I created 2 charts to put in the book that we can start looking at, because it's worth doing this with the understood emotions as well. There's an exercise in the book about having a look at or thinking about how many emotions could you name that you felt this week. Often when we do that exercise, if you just do it in set a timer for 2 minutes, quickly write down all the emotions you felt this week. Often people can't get to more than 10 emotions, sometimes not more than 5, because we don't talk about this stuff. We've never been taught about it. So understanding more emotions and connecting them with our feelings, the words with the feelings, can really help. On top of that is, in the book, we get into loads of detail of this, like different misunderstood emotions mainly, and understanding them better. A huge one for me is anger versus rage. Now, I did an episode on this last year, a full episode to itself, which is not worth me repeating here because it's like a half-an-hour episode just about anger and rage. One of the most important emotions to understand. Go, if you like this, if you want to know more and you haven't seen it, even if you have seen it, it's worth watching again or listen to it again. Go back to last year. It'll be something like episode 15 of the podcast from, I'd say, March or April last year. It's all about the difference between anger and rage. As a very quick summary, one of the problems we have in life when we're talking about anger is that most of the time what we're referring to is rage. So for me, the definition I've put on it is that rage is the manifestation of repressed anger. So if you are a people pleaser, like I used to be, and you've been raised as a people pleaser, what you will have probably been doing, most people I know do this on some level, is repress your anger. You've been taught since you were a kid not to be angry. So you repress anger, and every time you repress it, imagine a bucket filling with water, and then sooner or later, the bucket gets to the top. You repress anger one more time, the bucket overflows, you explode. Now, the problem is, we refer to that explosion in general language, again, a definition point, as anger. And that feeds into the loop of us telling ourselves a story that anger is unhealthy and bad, and we repress it more. The important thing is that's not anger at all. That's rage. Rage is unhealthy. Anger is not. And if we deal with our anger as it arises in a healthy way and we process it, if we accept, allow and process it, we never get to rage. So I used to have outbursts of rage maybe once a year, sometimes more often than that. And I look back now, it was all as a result of repressed anger. Guess what? Since I've started processing my emotions properly, I don't have explosions of rage anymore, because as anger comes up, I don't repress it. I don't suppress it. I know it's a perfectly healthy emotion. It's very, very useful in many, many situations. So if you're interested in hearing more of that, go back and listen to or watch that episode again. Another big one, which I love, is grief. Again, there's only time for a quick summary here. Grief, for me, when I was growing up, I only understood it as something you experience if someone dies. If you're anything like me, that's what you'll be thinking of it too. It's so powerful. It's such a powerful emotion that I could talk about it all day long. There's loads about this in the book. And it's worth, if you like this, it's worth doing your own research and digging into it more. There's all kinds of books and resources you can dig into. Grief is all about when we lose anything, basically. So as you're doing this work, you will hear me refer to an old me and a new me. I transform my life in a way that I now think of the old me as a different person. Well, guess what? That's like someone died. So I've had to grieve for a part of me that is no longer here. And I still have to do that sometimes. I have to grieve for ideas that have been lost. So I spent 38 years of my life imagining a future that never happened. I had a picture of a wife and kids and a house and a job and a certain lifestyle, and that didn't happen. And just because I chose a different way forward doesn't mean I still don't need to grieve that idea, because an idea is just as real as reality. That's all this is at the end of the day. We'll come on to that in future episodes about the stories we tell ourselves. So if you've had an idea in your mind for a long time and then that idea doesn't manifest, it doesn't turn out to be true, you will experience grief. And until we learn about this, we can experience things like depression and sadness, and we don't know where they come from until we recognize actually what we're feeling is grief. And what we need to do is grieve for something that we've lost. It's huge. As I say, more details in the book. Again, the same with anxiety, insecurity, and fear. We could talk all day long about these things. Anxiety in particular. Anxiety and insecurity, I talk about as being stealth emotions. They're things that most of us don't recognize. Many, many people do. You might be looking at this and saying, Paul, I know I'm really anxious. I know I'm really insecure. I used to look at people around me and think, God, how anxious are they? How insecure are they? I would never have deemed myself anxious or insecure. I look back now and think, wow, all I was doing was changing the definition of what I was feeling compared to other people. I would look at something that someone else was feeling anxious about, you know, a £5 late payment penalty on something, and I'd laugh and think, I'd never feel anxious about that because my problems were so much bigger at the time. What I didn't realize was I was experiencing anxiety about my own problems. I was just calling it something else. You might be doing a similar thing. If you experience things like insomnia, you bite your nails, you can't sit still, you can never just be by yourself for an amount of time. These are all signs of anxiety, and there are loads of them. It's worth digging into, again, with all of this stuff. Same with fear. I'd have told you in my whole life I was fearless. Now I look at things and think, God, I'm afraid so often. I just used to repress that emotion. So all of these things, they're worth digging into further. They're worth looking into more to really look at and understand and accept, A, that they are not negative, and B, that when they come up, it's important to recognize them as what they are, to accept them for what they are, and then to go on to the next phase. Because the first phase of this is to identify emotions. The last one I want to touch on, which again, I did a full episode on last year, is depression leading to suicidal thoughts. Those things often go hand in hand. You may have experienced depression. You may or may not have experienced suicidal thoughts. I did a full episode on this last year. It's dangerous to dip into because I have fairly controversial views about people talking about depression and suicide. I'm not a big fan of people doing it unless they've personally experienced it or they are in some way a professional and have got things that they can truly add to the conversation. Go back and watch or listen to that episode if you are interested in that topic. It's quite a powerful episode, I think. So what's the next phase of this? First phase, identify these emotions. So we want to be able to start looking at things, taking a deep breath, asking ourselves, what is this feeling? Looking at these charts, asking ourselves, do I feel anxious? Is this a feeling of anxiety? Is this a feeling of insecurity? Am I angry? I'll often say when it comes to processing, which is the next phase, I'll often say things out loud now. Just a very, very easy way to accept an emotion and to process it is to just recognize it. Because straight away, if we recognize it, we know we're not repressing it. We know we're not trying to suppress it. It's just to say, God, I feel really angry. That has really, really pissed me off. We don't necessarily need to do anything with that. And just recognizing it can be huge. Another big one as part of the exercises I do with people to go through this is massive, is free writing. So if you struggle with any of this, if you're listening to this thinking, Paul, I don't even know where to start, a huge and a hugely impactful exercise to do is to free write. And what I mean by that is get a pen and get some paper and just start writing about how you feel. Start writing about your day. Don't overthink it. Just let whatever wants to come out. Start writing. Start with, if you're struggling with where to start with a question. Write at the top of the page something like, how do I feel today? Or how do I feel about X situation? Just start writing and just see what comes out. If you keep your pen moving, if you turn off your brain and just let your subconscious talk and let anything out, do it in a private place where nobody can see. If you're worried about what you're going to write down because it might upset somebody else, do it on loose paper, not in a journal, so you can destroy the paper afterwards in a safe way. I don't want people complaining to me that they've burnt their house down by setting fire to things. But if you need to get rid of things, I have done this in the past. If you write things, if you find that you want to get stuff out of your system to process them that have been buried for years, often sometimes decades, you might find that you want to make sure it's confidential. And often I've seen this in people I've worked with. They've held things back that they wanted to say out loud or they wanted to write down, and they've held it back because they were worried someone else might see it and it might upset them. So this is important to do privately. It is just for you. It is for nobody's eyes, just yours. Write down everything. Just let it all come out, whatever you feel. and this ties into the take responsibility and be kind to yourself. There is no judgment. There is no judgment on any of your emotions. Remember, these are just emotions. They are neutral. So you might find yourself wanting to say things that you would judge ordinarily, that you don't want to think or feel about other people in your life or situations in your life. Just get it out. This is the most important thing right now. You just want to process it. You want to get it out there. Another part of this is crying. This is massive. Again, I'm a 41-year-old man. I am now, and I would never have been in the past, very comfortable talking about crying. In the first 38 years of my life, I must have cried after I was a child, when I would cry often, as children often do. After that, once I'd been trained not to cry, as we often are, especially boys, I reserved crying for things like people dying. That was it. I would cry at grandparents' funerals. Very rarely other than that. When I started doing this work and reconnecting with my emotions and opening everything up again, I would cry like a baby often, and I would feel physically releasing emotions. Think about this. Chemical reactions that have been repressed in my body, in your body for decades, being released. And whenever I would cry, I would feel that release. And all of a sudden, I'd understand what it meant when someone would say to me in the past, often women, without being stereotypical, have a good cry, it'll make you feel better. And when you've been raised as a man, like I am, and I don't particularly like stereotypes because this can equally apply to whatever gender you are, I would be like, no, I don't need to cry. That's ridiculous. Now I will sometimes feel myself think, God, I need a good cry. There's something built up in me that needs to come out. I let it out. I process it, whatever it is. It's really, really important if you can get to that phase. I know people who've done this work and done some work and they still struggle to get to that phase. If you do, just keep doing the free writing, talk about it, get things out. When you start to open this stuff up more and more and more, allow yourself to do this in a safe space, in a private place. This is not me, I'm not sitting in public crying my eyes out as a display. I'm doing this in private where it's safe. It's a really important way to process things. Another part of the acceptance of all of this is a story I love. So I often say, as adults, what we should be doing is modeling more the behavior of children and animals, because they are showing their emotions and who they're meant to be purely and unadulterated before they're trained to do anything else. When you may have heard me tell stories about my dog in the past, Tilly. She's a beautiful West Highland Terrier that me and my ex-wife bought 6 months before we split up. She ended up coming with me as part of our separation, and we have a love that is only shared between dogs and their owners. If you've got a dog and you love dogs, or any other animals for that matter, you'll know what I mean. Tilly absolutely loves me. I'll often go away traveling and I won't be there for a while. When she sees me, she goes insane. She jumps around in that way that only dogs can, where they spin around 360 without touching the floor. She basically wants, when she first sees me, to kiss my face and lick my face for as long as she wants to. If I try and kiss somebody else as I enter a room, before she gets to do that, she jumps up in between my face and their face and she gets me first. If someone comes near me while she's participating in this big display of love and emotion, she'll sometimes bark at them. Every now and then she'll snap at them, because that is not acceptable. She wants to just have her moment. If anybody else gets involved, if any other dog gets involved, my cousin's dog, I love to bits, and we've got a lovely relationship as well. If he's there, she gets completely jealous. She exudes jealousy. If you saw her, the number of times we've been around other people and they will say she will show such jealousy if somebody that she doesn't want to have attention gets attention, or vice versa. Now, the point of me telling you this story is that whenever we look at Tilly and we say, isn't she, look how jealous she is, isn't it funny? Whenever I see her after she's just acted like this jealous lunatic, I've never once walked into a room and seen her beating herself up about it. I've never once walked into a room and I gone to me, do you know what, Dad? Do you know before when I was being jealous? That's not acceptable, is it? Like, I shouldn't be like that. She displays her emotion. She shows her love. She shows her jealousy. And then it just passes. It disappears. She does what she does. She plays on the floor. She runs around. She goes out into the garden and has a poo on the grass. That's basically what she does. She's an animal. She just displays the emotion. Now, I'm not saying for 1 second we should just all blurt out all of our emotions as much as we ever want to. There is a balance to this. Something else, another theme you'll see as we go through. There is a balance. And at the same time, what we want to do is use Tilly as an example. It's okay to feel jealous. It's okay to show emotions that other people tell us we shouldn't feel, that we've been taught since we were little we shouldn't feel. There's another line that factors into this, which I love, which is sometimes, and that's okay. So instead of us labeling these things in black or white terms, and we'll say this about other people, we'll say about ourselves, oh, that person's such a knobhead, that person's such a bastard, that person's such a bitch. About ourselves, I'm depressed, I'm sad, I'm angry, I'm jealous, I'm full of self-pity. If we add to these sentences the word sometimes at the beginning and the words and that's okay at the end, it helps to soften it. So what we're saying is sometimes I'm depressed and that's okay. It combines loads of the things we've already talked about. So we're already accepting by saying sometimes I'm like this and that's okay. We're accepting it. By saying sometimes, we're accepting it's not black and white. It's not a permanent state. Instead of saying I am depressed, we are saying sometimes I'm depressed and that's okay. It's just an emotion. Sometimes I'm jealous and that's okay. Sometimes I feel sad and that's okay. Notice how whenever we feel one of the understood emotions, we don't go into it. We don't feel like we need to figure out why we feel happy. You don't wake up one morning and think, oh my God, I feel so happy today. Why do I feel happy? I'm going to sit down and figure this out. And where we want to get to with this is we want to treat the misunderstood emotions in the same way we treat the understood emotions. So a few weeks ago, I had a moment where, and this still happens now, I woke up one morning and thought, God, I feel a bit depressed. And because I've been through this process, this takes time to get to this stage, different amounts of time for different people. But because I've been through this and I've sped up the process, I was able to just very quickly go, that's okay. And by the time I'd walked from my bedroom to the bathroom, been to the bathroom and come back again, I didn't feel depressed anymore. And that ties into what we said at the start of the episode. It's just an emotion that lasts 90 seconds if we don't do anything with it. So just by recognizing the fact I felt depressed, sometimes I feel depressed, that's okay. Sometimes I feel sad, that's okay. Sometimes I feel self-pity, that's okay. This all helps us to accept, allow, and process things, and they just disappear. It's important to remember as well, there's the other side of this as well. So do you remember if we go back to the emotional repression episode, we talked about all emotions coming out of one tap. And if we suppress one side, we're suppressing the other. That's true in this as well. So it's important to recognize, and that's why I did 2 charts, misunderstood and understood emotions, that we might actually be still repressing and suppressing what we used to call positive emotions, understood emotions, joy, happiness. Do you ever feel enough joy? Do you laugh as much as you could? Do you allow yourself to just let go? When people talk about letting their hair down, what they usually mean is getting drunk, taking drugs. Well, what about being able to do that without taking drugs and getting drunk? What if we just let our hair down? What if we just experience our true emotions for what they are? Again, think of dogs, think of little kids. They just experience these things and they don't judge them. We've been taught over the years to repress, and because we're repressing everything at once, it all gets repressed. So accepting, allowing, and processing the understood emotions is equally as important. And to conclude this big chapter, this big episode, this big topic, it's always worth remembering that this is unlikely to change overnight. We are up against decades of programming. Depending on what your age, I was nearly 4 decades, 38 years on the planet of programming to be a certain way, to think and feel about emotions in a certain way before I started doing this work. I often say to clients, it's not until I've been living this life with this type of programming since I was 38, nearly 3 years ago now. It's not until I'm 76 years old, if I live that long, that I will have lived equal parts of my life with both programming. Until I'm 76, I will still always be up against the old programming being there for longer. So it takes time and it takes practice. This is, again, it's like going to the gym. We can't just expect to do this once and it magically change our lives. We need to practice. We need to take responsibility. We need to be kind to ourselves while we're doing it. I hope that all makes sense. If you have any questions, send them to questions@paul7cope.com. I will answer as many as I possibly can. This stuff, because we're up against decades of programming, is likely to start raising questions. You can still get the free chapters of the book as well. paul7cope.com/free chapters. Hope you enjoyed that. Take care. See you next time.